No stars on it. And Beardbarian, isn't it? I got 60. I was immortalized by a Wikipedia post.
Hello, everybody, and that is how I ghetto a stream. Hey, Mariel. Hey, Ghost Dog. Hey, Beardbarian. How's everybody doing this afternoon or morning, depending on where you are in the world, or evening even. Everybody's in a different time zone every once in a while. Today, we are going to go into... Hey, Wiki. How you doing? There will be some stuff going, cycling through in the chat like usual. I'm going to be shilling my GoFundMe link, hopefully, if Nightbot has made an appearance. If not, I'm going to probably have to wind up tweeting it out. Oh, there he goes. Okay, so he is here today. Every once in a while, he decides to work, and every once in a while, he does not.
Oh,
hello, Eric. How are you? Yesterday, I tweeted out that I had to resubmit one of my newscasts for monetization because they said advertiser friendly. Well, surprise, surprise, surprise. After review, they actually monetized it. Rather shocked and surprised and a bit happy about that. So I figured I would give you guys that particular announcement, seeing how more often than not, depending on what I talk about on my newscast, they tend to demonetize stuff. So, without further ado, here's Chapter 3 of Patricia Cornwell's Postmortem. I pulled into my driveway, relieved to find Bertha's boat of a Pontiac still there. The front door opened before I had a chance to select the right key. "Mother?" I asked right off. Bertha and I faced each other inside the spacious foyer. She knew exactly what I meant. We had this conversation at the end of every day when Lucy was in town. "Been bad, Dr. K. That child been in your office all day banging on that computer of yours. I tell you, as much as I step foot in there to bring her a sandwich and ask how she be, and she start hollering and carrying on. But I know," her dark eyes softened, "she's just upset because you had to work." Guilt seeped through my numbness. "I seen the evening paper, Dr. K. Lord have mercy." She was working on one arm at a time into the sleeves of her raincoat. "I know why you had to be doing what you was doing all day. Lord, Lord, I sure do hope the police catch that man. Meanness, just plain meanness." Bertha knew what I did for a living, and she never questioned me. Even if one of my cases was someone from her neighborhood, she never asked. The evening paper's in there. She gestured toward the living room and collected her pocketbook from the table near the door. I stuck it under the sofa cushion so she couldn't get hold of it. I didn't know if you'd want her to be reading it or not, Dr. K. She patted my shoulder on the way out. I watched her make her way to her car and slowly back out of the drive. God bless her. I no longer apologized for my family. Bertha had been insulted and bullied either face-to-face or over the phone by my niece, my sister, my mother. She never sympathized or criticized, and I sometimes suspected she felt sorry for me, and that only made me feel worse. Shutting the front door, I went into the kitchen. It was my favorite room, high-ceilinged, the appliances modern but few, for I prefer to do most things, such as making pasta or kneading dough, by hand. There was a maple butcher block in the center of the cooking area, just the right height for someone not a stitch over 5'3" in her stocking feet. Hello, Apostmatic. The breakfast area faced a large picture window overlooking the wooded backyard and the bird feeder. Splashing the monochrome blondes of wooden cabinets and countertops were loose arrangements of yellow and red roses from my passionately well-attended garden. Lucy was not here. Her supper dishes were upright in the drain board, and I assumed she was in my office again. I made her and poured myself a glass of Chablis. Leaning against the counter, I shut my eyes for a moment and sipped. I didn't know what I was going to do about Lucy. First visit here since I had left the Dade County Medical Examiner's office and moved away from the city where I was born and where I had returned after my divorce. Lucy is my only niece. At 10, she was already doing high school level science and math. She was a genius, an impossible little holy terror of enigmatic Latin descent whose father died when she was small. She had no one but my only sister, Dorothy, who was too caught up in writing children's books to worry much about her flesh and blood daughter. Lucy adored me beyond any rational explanation, and her attachment to me demanded energy I did not have at the moment. While driving home, I debated changing her flight reservations and sending her back to Miami early. I couldn't bring myself to do it. She would be devastated. It would be the final rejection in a lifelong series of rejections. Another reminder she was inconvenient and unwanted. To this all year, I had been looking forward to it too. Taking another sip of wine, I waited for the absolute quiet to begin untangling my snarled nerves and smoothing away my worries. My house was in a new subdivision in the west end of the city, where the large homes stood on wooded 1-acre lots, and the traffic on the streets was mostly station wagons and family cars. The neighbors were so quiet, break-ins and vandalism so rare, I couldn't recall the last time I had seen a police car cruise through. The stillness, the security was worth any price, a necessity, a must for me. It was soothing to my soul on early mornings to eat breakfast alone and know the only violence beyond my window would be a squirrel and a blue jay fighting over the feeder. I took a deep breath and another sip of wine. I began to dread going to bed, dreading those moments in the dark before sleep, fearing what it would be like when I permitted my mind to be still and therefore unguarded. I could not stop seeing images of Lori Peterson. A dam had broken and my imagination was running in, quickening the images into more terrible ones. I saw him with her inside that bedroom. I could almost see his face, but it had no features, just a glimpse of a face like flash going by as he was with her. She would try to reason with him at first, fear of waking up at the feel of cold, flat steel to her throat or at the chilling sound of his voice. She would say things, try to talk him out of it for God knows how long as he cut the cords from the lamps and began to bind her. She was a Harvard graduate, a surgeon. She would attempt to use her mind against a force that is mindless. Then the images went wild, like a film at high speed, flapping off the reel as her attempts disintegrated into unmitigated terror. The unspeakable. I would not look. I could not bear to see any more. I had to control my thoughts. My home office overlooked the woods in back, and the blinds were typically drawn because it has always been hard for me to concentrate if I'm offered a view. I paused in the doorway. quietly letting my attention drift as Lucy vigorously tapped away on the keyboard on top of my sturdy oak desk, her back to me. I had not straightened up in here in weeks, and the sight of it was shameful. Books leaned this way and that in the bookcases. Several law reporters were stacked on the floor, and others were out of order. Propped against a wall were my diplomas and certificates, Cornell, Johns Hopkins, Georgetown, et al. I'd been meaning to hang them in my office downtown, but had yet to get around to it. Sloppily piled in the corner of deep blue Tai Ming rug were journal articles still waiting to be read and filed. Professional success meant I no longer had the time to be impeccably neat, and yet clutter bothered me as much as ever. "How come you're spying on me?" Lucy muttered without turning around. "I'm not spying on you." I smiled a little and kissed the top of her burnished red head. "Yes, you are," she continued to type. "I saw you. I saw your reflection in the monitor. You've been standing in the doorway watching me." I put my arms around her, rested my chin on the top of her head, and looked at the black screen filled with chartreuse commands. It had never occurred to me before this moment that the screen had a mirror effect, and now I understood why Margaret, my programming analyst, would hail by name people walking past her office, though she had her back to the door. Lucy's face was a blur in the monitor. Mostly I saw a reflection of her grown-up, tortoise-rimmed glasses. She always greeted me with a tree frog hug, but she was in a mood. "I'm sorry we couldn't go to Monticello today, Lucy," I ventured. A shrug. "I'm as disappointed as you are," I said. Another shrug. "I'd rather use the computer anyway." She didn't mean it, but the remark stung. "I had a shitload of stuff to do," she went on, sharply striking the return key. "Your database needed cleaning up. Bet you haven't initialized it in a year." She swiveled around in my leather chair, and I moved to one side, crossing my arms at my waist. "So I fixed it up." "You what?" No, Lucy wouldn't do such a thing. Initializing was the same thing as formatting, obliterating, erasing all of the data on the hard disk. On the hard drive were, or had been, half a dozen statistical tables I was using for journal articles under deadline. The only backups were several months old. Lucy's green eyes fixed on mine and looked owlish behind the thick lenses of her glasses. Her round elfish face was hard as she said, "I looked in the books to see how. All you do is type IORI as the C prompt, and after it's initialized, you do the add-all and catalog.ora. It's easy. Any dickhead could figure it out." I didn't say anything. I didn't reprimand her for her dirty mouth. I was feeling weak in the knees. I was remembering Dorothy calling me, absolutely hysterical several years ago, while she was out shopping. Lucy had gone into her office and formatted every last one of her diskettes, erasing everything on them. On 2 of them was a book Dorothy was writing, chapters she hadn't gotten around to printing out or backing up yet. A homicidal event. "Lucy, you didn't." "Oh, don't worry," she said sullenly. "I exported all your data first. The book says to, and then I imported it back in and reconnected your grants. Everything's there, but it's cleaned up space-wise. I mean..." I pulled up an ottoman and sat beside her. It was then I noticed what was beneath a layer of diskettes. Folded the way papers are folded when they have been read, I slid it out and opened it to the front page. The banner headline was the last thing I wanted to see. "Young surgeon slain, believed to be strangler's 4th victim. The 30-year-old surgical resident was found brutally murdered inside her home in Berkeley Downs shortly after midnight. Police say there is strong evidence that her death is related to the deaths of 3 other Richmond women who were strangled in their homes within the last 2 months. The most recent victim has been identified as Lori Ann Peterson, a graduate of Harvard Medical School. She was last seen alive yesterday, shortly after midnight, when she left the VMC hospital emergency room, where she was currently completing a rotation in trauma surgery. It is believed she drove directly home from the hospital and was murdered sometime between 12:30 and 2 this morning. The killer apparently got inside her house by cutting a screen to a bathroom window that was unlocked. It went on. There was a paragraph. A grainy black and white tableau of paramedics carrying her body down the front step. Oh, there was a photograph. I'm sorry, let me start that again. There was a photograph. A grainy black and white tableau of paramedics carrying her body down the front steps. And a smaller photograph of a figure in a khaki raincoat. I recognized as me. The caption read, "Dr. K. Scarpetta, Chief Medical Examiner, arriving at murder scene." Lucy was staring wide-eyed at me. Bertha had been wise to hide the paper, but Lucy was resourceful. I didn't know what to say. What does a 10-year-old think when she reads something like this, especially if it is accompanied by a grim photograph of her Auntie Kay? I'd never fully explained to Lucy the details of my profession. I'd restrained myself from preaching to her about the savage world in which we live. I didn't want her to be like me, robbed of innocence and idealism, baptized in the bloody waters of randomness and cruelty, the fabric of trust forever torn. It's like the Herald, she surprised me by saying. All the time there's stuff in the Herald about people being... This week they found a man in the canal and his head was cut off. He must have been a bad man for someone to cut off his head off. He may have been, Lucy, but it doesn't justify someone's doing something like that to him. And not everyone who is hurt or murdered is bad. Mom says they are. She says good people don't get murdered. Only hookers and drug dealers and burglars do. A thoughtful pause. Sometimes police officers do too, because they try to catch the bad people. Dorothy would say such a thing, and what was worse, she would believe it. I felt a flare of the old anger. But the lady who got strangled... Strangled? Lucy wavered, her eyes so wide they seemed to swallow me. She was a doctor, Auntie Kay. How could she be bad? You're a doctor, too. She was like you, then. The time. It was getting late. I switched off the computer, took Lucy's hand, and we walked out of the office and into the kitchen. When I turned to her to suggest a snack before bed, I was dismayed to see she was biting her bottom lip, her eyes welling. Lucy, why are you crying? She wrapped around me, sobbing. Clinging to me with fierce desperation, she cried, I don't want you to die. I don't want you to die. Lucy! I was stunned, bewildered. Her tantrums, her arrogant and angry outbursts were one thing, but this... I could feel her tears soaking through my blouse. I could feel the hot intensity of her miserable little body as she held on to me. It's all right, Lucy, was all I could think to say, and I pressed her close. I don't want you to die, Auntie Kay. I'm not going to die, Lucy. Daddy did. Nothing's going to happen to me, Lucy. She was not to be consoled. The story in the paper affected her in a deep and pernicious way. She read it with an adult intellect yet to be weaned from a child's fearful imagination. Her insecurities and losses. Oh, Lord, I groped for the appropriate response and couldn't come up with a thing. My mother's accusations began throbbing in some deep part of my psyche. I had no children. I would have made an awful mother. You should have been a man, my mother had said during one of our less productive encounters in recent history. All work and ambition. It's not natural for a woman. You'll dry out like a chinch bug, Kay. And during my emptiest moments, when I felt the worst about myself, damn if I wouldn't see one of those chinch bug shells that were used to litter the lawn of my childhood home. Translucent, brittle, dried out, dead. It wasn't something I would ordinarily do, pour a 10-year-old a glass of wine. I took her to her room and we drank in bed. She asked me questions impossible to answer. Why do people hurt other people? And is it a game for him? I mean, does he do it for fun? Sort of like MTV? They do things like that on MTV. But it's make-believe. Nobody gets hurt. Maybe he doesn't mean to hurt them, Auntie Kay. There are some people who are evil, I said quietly, replying. Like dogs, Lucy. Some dogs bite people for no reason. There's something wrong with them. They're bad and will always be bad. Because people were mean to them first? That's what makes them bad. In some circumstances, yes, I told her, but not always. Sometimes there isn't a reason. In a way, it doesn't matter. People make choices. Some people would rather be bad, would rather be cruel. It's just an ugly, unfortunate part of life. Like Hitler, she muttered, taking a swallow of wine. I began stroking her hair. She rambled on, her voice thick and deep. Like Jimmy Groom, too. He lives on our street and shoots birds with his BB gun, and he likes to steal bird eggs out of nests and smash them on the road and watch baby birds struggle. I hate him. I hate Jimmy Groom. I threw a rock at him once and hit him when he was riding by on his bike, but he doesn't know it was me. I was hiding behind the bushes. I sipped wine and continued stroking her hair. God won't let anything happen to you, will he? She asked. Nothing's going to happen to me, Lucy. I promise. If you pray to God to take care of you, he does, doesn't he? He takes care of us. Though I wasn't sure, I believed it. She frowned. I'm not sure she believed it either. Don't you ever get scared? I smiled. Everybody gets scared now and then. I'm perfectly safe. Nothing's going to happen to me. The last thing she mumbled before drifting off was, I wish I could always be there, Auntie Kay. I want to be just like you. 2 hours later, I was upstairs and still wide awake and staring at a page in a book without really seeing the words when the telephone rang. My response was Pavlovian, a startled reflex. I snatched up the receiver, my heart thudding. I was expecting, fearing Marino's voice, as if last night were starting all over again. Hello? Nothing. Hello? In the background, I could hear the faint, spooky music I associated with early morning foreign movies or horror films, or the scratchy strains of a Victrola before the dial tone cut it off. Coffee? Please, I said. This sufficed for a good morning. Whenever I stopped by Niels Vander's lab, his first word of greeting was, coffee? I always accepted. Caffeine and nicotine were two vices I've readily adopted. I wouldn't think of buying a car that isn't as solid as a tank, and I wouldn't start the engine without fastening my seatbelt. There are smoke alarms throughout my house and an expensive burglar alarm system. I no longer enjoy flying and opt for Amtrak whenever possible. But caffeine, cigarettes, and cholesterol, the grim reapers of the common man, God forbid I should give them up. I go to a national meeting and sit at a banquet with 300 other forensic pathologists, the world's foremost experts in disease and death. 75% of us don't jog or do aerobics, don't walk when we can ride, don't stand when we can sit, and assiduously avoid stairs or hills unless they're on the decline. A third of us smoke, most of us drink, and all of us eat as if there's no tomorrow. Stress, depression, perhaps a greater need for laughter and pleasure because of the misery we see. Who can be sure of the reason? One of my more cynical friends, an assistant chief in Chicago, likes to say, what the hell? You die. Everybody dies. So you die healthy. So what? Vander went to the drip coffee machine on the counter behind the desk and poured 2 cups. He had fixed my coffee countless times and could never remember I drank it black. My ex-husband never remembered either. 6 years I lived with Tony, and he couldn't remember that I drank my coffee black, or like my steaks medium rare, not red as Christmas. Just a little pink. My dress size? Forget it. I wear an 8. Have a figure that will accommodate most anything, but I can't abide fluff, froth, and frills. He always made me something in a 6, usually lacy and gauzy and meant for bed. His mother's favorite color was spring green. She wore a size 14. She loved ruffles, hated pullovers, preferred zippers, was allergic to wool, didn't want to bother with anything that had to be dry cleaned or ironed, had a visceral antagonism toward anything purple, deemed white or beige impractical, wouldn't wear horizontal stripes or paisley, wouldn't have been caught dead in ultra suede, believed her body wasn't capable with pleats, and was quite fond of pockets, the more the better. When it came to his mother, Tony would somehow get it right. Vander dumped the same heaping teaspoons of whitener and sugar into my cup as he dumped into his own. Typically, he was disheveled, his wispy gray hair wild, his voluminous lab coat smeared with black fingerprint powder, a spray of ballpoint pens and felt-tip markers protruding from his ink-stained breast pocket. He was a tall man with long, bony extremities and a disproportionately round belly. His hand was shaped remarkably like a light bulb. His eyes a washed-out blue and perpetually clouded by thought. My first winter here, he stopped by my office late one afternoon to announce it was snowing. A long red scarf was wrapped around his neck, and pulled over his ears was a leather flight helmet, possibly ordered from a Banana Republic catalog, and absolutely the most ridiculous winter hat I'd ever seen. I think he would have looked perfectly at home in a Fokker fighter plane. The Flying Dutchman, we appropriately called him around the office. He was always in a hurry, flying up and down the halls, his lab coat flapping around his legs. You saw the papers? He asked, blowing on his coffee. The whole blessed world saw the papers, I dismally replied. Sunday's front page was worse than Saturday evening's. The banner headline ran across the entire width of the top of the page, The letters about an inch high. The story included a sidebar about Lori Peterson and a photograph that looked as if it came from a yearbook. Abby Turnbull was aggressive enough, if not indecent, to attempt an interview with Lori Peterson's family, who lived in Philadelphia and, quote, were too distraught to comment, unquote. Helping us any, Vander stated the obvious. I'd like to know where the information's coming from so I could string a few people up by their thumbs. The cops haven't learned to keep their mouths shut, I told him. When they learn to zip their lips, they won't have leaks to bitch about anymore. Well, maybe it's the cops. Whatever the case, the stuff's making my wife crazy. I think if we lived in the city, she'd make us move today. He went to his desk, which was a jumble of computer printouts, photographs, and telephone messages. There was a quart beer bottle with a dried, bloody shoe print, both inside plastic bags and tagged as evidence. Randomly scattered about were 10 small jars of formalin, each containing a charred human fingertip atomically severed at the second joint. In cases of unidentified bodies that are badly burned or decomposed, it wasn't always possible to get prints by the usual method. Incongruously stationed in the midst of this macabre mess was a bottle of Vaseline intensive care lotion. Rubbing a dollop of the lotion on his hands, Vander pulled on a pair of white cotton gloves. The acetone, xylene, and constant hand washing that go with his trade were brutal on his skin, and I can always tell when he'd forgotten to put on gloves while using 9-hydrin, a chemical helpful for visualizing latent prints, because he'd walk around with purple fingers for a week. His morning ritual complete, he motioned me to follow him out into the 4th floor hallway. Several doors down was the computer room, clean, almost sterile, and filled with light silver modular hardware of various boxy shapes and sizes, bringing to mind a space-age laundromat. The sleek, upright unit, closely resembling the set of washers and dryers, was the fingerprint matching processor. Its function to match unknown prints against the multi-million fingerprint database stored on magnetic disks. The FMP, as it was known, with its advanced pipeline and parallel processing, was capable of 800 matches per second. Vander didn't like to sit around and wait for the results. It was his habit to let the thing cook overnight, so he had something to look forward to when he came in to work the next morning. The most time-consuming part of the process was what Vander did Saturday, feeding the prints into the computer. This required his taking photographs of the latent prints in question, enlarging them 5 times, placing a sheet of tracing paper over each photograph, and with a felt-tip pen tracing the most significant characteristics. Next, he reduced the drawing to a 1-to-1 sized photograph, precisely correlating to the actual size of the print. He glued the photograph to a latent print layout sheet, which he fed into the computer. Now it simply was a matter of printing out the results of the search. Vander seated himself with deliberation of a concert pianist about to perform. I almost expected him to flip up his lab coat in back and stretch his fingers. His Steinway was the remote input station, consisting of a keyboard and monitor, an image scanner, and a fingerprint image processor, among other things. The image scanner was capable of reading both 10 print cards and latent prints. The fingerprint image processor, or FIP, as Vander referred to it, automatically deleted fingerprint characteristics. Yeah, it would be an odd combination. All right. I watched him type in several commands. Then he punched the print button, and lists of potential suspects were rapidly hammered across the green striped paper. I pulled up a chair as Vander tore off the printout and ripped the paper into 10 sections, separating his cases. We were interested in 88-01651, the identification number for the latents found on Lori Peterson's body. Computerized print comparison is analogous to a political election. Possible matches are called candidates and ranked according to score. The higher the score, the more points of comparison a candidate has in common with the unknown latents entered in the computer. In the case of 88-1651, there was one candidate by a wide margin of more than 1,000 points. This could mean only one thing. Or as Vander glibly put it, a hot one. The winning candidate was impersonally listed as NIC 112. I really hadn't expected this. So whoever left the prints on her has prints on file with the database, I asked. That's right. Meaning it's possible he has a criminal record. Possible, but not necessarily. Vander got up and moved to the verification terminal. He lightly rested his fingers on the keyboard and started into the CRT display. He added, could be he was printed for some other reason. If he's in law enforcement or maybe applied for a taxi license once. He began calling up fingerprint cards from the depths of image retrieval. Instantly, the search print image, in a large aggregation of loops and whorls in turquoise blue, was juxtaposed to the candidate print image. To the right was a column listing the sex, race, date of birth, and other information revealing the candidate's identification. Producing a hard copy of the prints, he handed it over. I studied it, read and reread the identity of NIC 112. Would be thrilled. According to the computer, and there could be no mistake about it, the latents the laser picked up on Lori Peterson's shoulder were left by Matt Peterson, her husband. And that is chapter 3. Anyone wishing a link to discuss what was just written, please put the request in the live chat. If you want me to read chapter 4, please. I can't talk. I can read, but I can't talk. If you would like me to read another chapter, please press 1 in the live chat, and I will go ahead and read chapter 4. I'm finding this kind of interesting because having written other books in the Scarpetta series, I know this is Marino's mentality. He likes to jump to conclusions oftentimes when you find prints like this. So who knows?
Damn interesting.
It is, isn't it? I'm beginning to think, and this is a prediction because I don't remember reading this book, I'm beginning to think that he discovered her body and he touched her where they found the prints.
Yeah, maybe tried to shake her.
Yeah, maybe tried to shake her awake or something. Let me see how many people are watching. Let me see. We've got 8 watching. Okay. Let me go ahead and tweet this out. Okay. We have a few people. So, what do you guys think of the story so far? I'm finding it rather interesting. It's one of her older books, one of her first books in the Scarpetta series. I like how she explains things without being overly simplified in her explanations.
I do enjoy that.
Mm-hmm. I like reading a good book that way. Would you like to come on to discuss the nitpicks of cosmetic?
Yeah, throw it in there.
Okay. All right. Take care, Ghost Dog. Okay. All right. Cool. That's 2 for another chapter.
Yeah, the cosmetic wants to come on.
All right.
Bring her on.
Grab the
Discuss
link.
it and we'll grab another chapter.
And we'll grab another chapter. Yeah, he's got to work. He caught what he could. Let me see here. Put this one. This link is a little more reliable than others. Okay, we'll discuss your nitpicks and then we'll continue. Let me come over here, and if your Discord is open, that's where I am dropping it. Okay, here we go. The link to the live chat is in the Discord, and I am completely freaking amazed that the Discord is working and not Oh, she was in the, yeah, I know. She sort of kind of juxtaposed the thing because she went phone call, and the next thing you know, she's in the in the office talking to Vander about the prince. That was a little jarring to me too. But you do have to keep in mind that this is early in her Scarpetta series, and there are a few things that authors iron out during the course of their writing a book that improves their writing and their storytelling.
Yeah, there should have been a little bit of a transition.
Yeah, there should have been a little bit of a transition. I agree.
Hello.
Hello.
I don't really have, I was going to say, I don't really have a major nitpick, but I think one of the things that she put in, which seems like slightly, unbelievable in a way, is that they had these relatively intelligent people who automatically said Hitler was evil. Am I denying Hitler was evil? No. But what I'm thinking is that Hitler probably didn't think he was doing anything evil.
Yeah, I agree with that, but we have to keep in mind that since this is early in the series, Lucy's actually just 10 years old. So she's seeing things in black and white, even though she is a genius in some things. She's a little short on others. And
yeah, like emotionally lacking development.
Exactly. As most geniuses tend to be, they excel at a lot of things, and they're a bit deficient in others. And we're just now getting a glimpse of what her sister's like, and if her sister actually, fed that into her, that is a reason why Lucy would parrot something like that.
Which is entirely possible. I think I'm trying to place what I'm trying to say here. I am so rubbish with trying to think on the spot. Yeah, it did, like Mariel said in the chat, it did seem a bit weird how the point of transition from the wine drinking and being in the office, like that was almost slightly unclear. It could have been maybe led into a little better.
Yeah, I agreed with that too, because she hinted at going to bed, and then the next thing you know, the phone rings and the guy's asking her for coffee, and then the next thing you know, she's in the office, and it's like, okay, how did this happen? Now we're looking at fingerprints.
Like, wow, that's a lot to do while you're drinking wine.
Yeah, it is.
And then
it is.
Yeah, I'm finding some of her descriptions so far could be possibly a little bit better. But at the same time, like you say, this is probably one of her earlier novels, so that's a craft that develops a lot over time with authors and what the more feedback that they've had.
Yeah.
So
and it kind of gets hard to balance, especially when you're looking at it from a forensic point of view, because not everybody reading your book is going to understand every medical term or name for the technology that they're using.
Yeah, you have to kind of dumb it down enough to, have it make sense to the layman, but you also kind of have to be, descriptive enough to make sense to other people and not have it be completely laughable.
Yeah.
It's like one of those really difficult lines to walk.
It is. It really, really is. I have that bit of a problem sometimes too with some of the things that I write, because I want to explain it, but I don't want to explain it too much, because there is a line you can cross to where you lose your reader.
And it's not just that, but you sometimes come across as almost being like condescending in a way. And you really don't want to do that, because if the reader feels that you're being condescending, you can cause them to lose interest.
Yeah. Okay, seeing how everybody wants me to continue, it looks like we're going to get 2 chapters in this week.
Yeah, I'll mute my microphone while you continue reading.
Okay. Chapter 4. I was not unduly surprised that Matt Peterson touched her body. Often it is a reflex to touch someone who appears dead, to feel for a pulse or to grip a shoulder lightly the way one does to wake up the person. What dismayed me were 2 things. First, the latents were picked up because the individual who left them had a residue of the perplexing sparkles on his fingers, evidence also found in the previous strangling cases. Second, Matt Peterson's 10-print card had not been turned into the lab yet. The only reason the computer got a hit was he already had prints on file with the database. I was telling Vander we needed to find out why and when Peterson was printed in the past if he had a criminal record when Marino walked in. "Your secretary said you was up here," he announced by way of a greeting. He was eating a donut I recognized as having come from the box by the office machine downstairs. Rose always brought in donuts on Monday mornings. Glancing around at the hardware, he casually shoved a manila envelope my way. "Sorry, Niels," he mumbled, "but the doc here says she's got first dibs." Hey, Zeph. Vander looked curiously at me as I opened the envelope. Inside was a plastic evidence bag containing Peterson's 10-print card. Marino had put me on the spot, and I didn't appreciate it. "Thank you, Batman. No, I am not going to read it in the style of Hot Hell 9000, but thank you anyway." The card, under ordinary circumstances, should have been reseated directly into the fingerprints lab, not me. It is this very sort of maneuver that creates animosity on the part of one's colleagues. They assume you're violating their turf, them when, in truth, you may be doing nothing of the sort. I explained to Vander, "I didn't want this left on your desk, out in the open where it might be handled. Matt Peterson supposedly was using grease paint before he came home. If there was a residue on his hands, it may also be on his card." Widened. The thought appealed to him. "Sure, we'll run it under the laser." Marino was staring sullenly at me. I asked him, "What about the survival knife?" He produced another envelope from the stack wedged between his elbow and waist. "Was on my way to take it to Frank." Vander suggested, "We'll take a look at it with the laser first." Then he printed out another hard copy of NIC 112, the latents that Matt Peterson had left on his wife's body, and presented it to Marino. He studied it briefly, muttering, "Holy shit," and looked up straight at me. His eyes smiled in triumph. I was familiar with the look, which I had expected. It said, "So there, Miss Chief, so maybe you got book learning, but me, I know the street." I could feel the investigative screws tightening on the husband of a woman who I still believed was slain by a man not known to any of us. 15 minutes later, Vander, Marino, and I were inside what was the equivalent of a dark room adjoining the fingerprints lab. On the countertop near a large sink were the 10-print card and the survival knife. The room was pitch black. Marino's big belly was unpleasantly brushing my left elbow as the dazzling pulses ignited a scattering of sparkles on the inky smudges of the card. In addition, there were sparkles on the handle of the knife, which was hard rubber and too coarse for prints. On the knife's wide, shiny blade, there was a smattering of virtually microscopic debris and several distinct particle prints that Vander dusted and lifted. He leaned closer to the 10-print card. Quick visual comparison with his eagle expert eye was enough for him to tentatively say, based on an initial Riz comparison, they're his. The prints on the blade are Peterson's. The laser went off, throwing us into complete blackness, and presently we were squinting in the rude glare of overhead lights that had suddenly returned us to the world of dreary cinder block and white formica. Pushing back my goggles, I began the litany of objective reminders as Vander fooled around with the laser and Marino-lit cigarette. The prints on the knife may not mean anything. If the knife belonged to Peterson, you'd expect to find his prints. As for the sparkling residue, yes, it's obvious he had something on his hands when he touched his wife's body and when he was fingerprinted. But we can't be sure the substance is the same as the glitter found elsewhere, particularly in the first 3 strangling cases. We'll give scanning electron microscopy a shot at it, hopefully determine if the elemental compositions or infrared spectrums are the same as those in the residues found on the other areas of her body and in the previous cases. What? Marino asked incredulously. You thinking Matt had one thing on his hands and the killer had something else? And they ain't the same, but both look the same under the laser? Almost everything reacts strongly to laser looks the same, I told him in slow, measured words. It glows like a neon light. Yeah, but most people don't have white neon crap on their hands, to my knowledge. I had to agree. Most people don't. Sort of weird little coincidence. Matt just happens to have the stuff on his hands, whatever it is. You mentioned he'd just come home from a dress rehearsal, I reminded him. That's his story. It might not be a bad idea to collect the makeup he was using Friday night and bring it in for testing. Marino stared disdainfully at me. Hi, Nuggets. In my office was one of the few personal computers on the second floor. It was connected to the main computer down the hall, but it wasn't a dumb terminal. Even if the main computer was down, I could use my PC for word processing, if nothing else. Marino handed over the 2 diskettes found on the desk inside the Peterson bedroom. I slipped them into the drives and executed a directory command for each one. An index of files, or chapters, of what was clearly Matt Peterson's dissertation, appeared on the screen. The subject was Tennessee Williams, whose most successful plays reveal a frustrating world in which sex and violence lie beneath the surface of a romantic gentility, read the opening paragraph of the introduction. Marino was peering over my shoulder, shaking his head. Jeez, he muttered. This is only getting better. Freaked out when I told him we was taking these discs and look at this stuff. I rolled down the screen. Flashing past were Williams's controversial treatments of homosexuality and cannibalism. There were references to the brutish Stanley Kowalski and the castrated gigolo in Sweet Bird of Youth. I didn't need clairvoyant powers to read Marino's mind, which was as banal as the front page of a tabloid. To him, this was stuff of a garden variety porn, the fuel of psychopathic minds that feed on fantasies of sexual aberrancies and violence. Marino wouldn't know the difference between the street and the stage if he were pistol whipped with a Drama 101 course. The people like Williams and even Matt Peterson who created such scenarios rarely are the individuals who go around living them. I looked levelly at Marino. What would you think if Peterson were an Old Testament scholar? He shrugged, his eyes shifting away from me, glancing back at the screen. Hey, this ain't exactly Sunday school material. Neither are rapes, stonings, beheadings, and horrors. And in real life, Truman Capote wasn't a mass murderer, Sergeant. He backed away from the computer and went to a chair. I swiveled around, facing him across the wide expanse of my desk. Ordinarily, when he stopped by my office, he preferred to stand, to remain on his feet, towering over me. But he was sitting, and we were eye to eye. I decided he was planning to stay a while. How about seeing if you can print out this thing? You mind? Looks like a good bedtime reading, he smiled snidely. Who knows? Like many be this American lit freak quotes, Marquis de Sade, what's his face in there too? The Marquis de Sade was French. Whatever. I restrained my irritation. I was wondering what would happen if one of my medical examiner's wives had been murdered. Would Marino look in the library and think he'd struck pay dirt when he found volume after volume on forensics and perverse crimes in history? His eyes narrowed as he lit another cigarette and took a big drag. He waited until he'd blown out a thin stream of smoke before saying, You've apparently got a high opinion of Peterson. What's it based on? The fact he's an artist or just that he's a hotshot college kid? It was the insane killer clown. Like it, Batman. That's funny. I have no opinion of him, I replied. I know nothing about him except he doesn't profile right to be the person strangling these women. He got thoughtful. Well, I do know about him, Doc. You see, I talked to him for several hours. He reached inside a pocket of his plaid sports jacket and tossed 2 microcassette tapes on the blotter within easy reach of me. I got out my cigarettes and lit one too. Let me tell you how it went down. Me and Becca are in the kitchen with him, okay? The squad's just left with the body when, bingo, Peterson's personality completely changes. He sits up straighter in the chair, his mind clears, and his hands start gesturing like he's on stage or something. It was friggin' unbelievable. His eyes tear up now and then, his voice cracks. He flushes and gets pale. I'm thinking to myself, this ain't an interview. It's a damn performance. Settling back in the chair, he loosened his tie. I'm thinking where I've seen this before, mainly back in New York, with the likes of Johnny Andretti, with his silk suits and imported cigarettes, charm oozing out his ears. He's so smooth you start falling all over yourself to accommodate him, and begin suppressing the minor detail that he's whacked more than 20 people during his career. Then there's Phil, the pimp. He beats his girls with coat hangers, 2 of them to death, and tears up inside his restaurant, which is just a front for his escort service. Phil's all broken up about his dead hookers, and he's leaning across the table saying to me, "Please find who did this to them, Pete. He has to be an animal. Here, try a little of this Chianti, Pete. It's nice." Point is, Doc, I've been around the block more than once, and Peterson's setting off the same alarm tones like Andretti and Phil did. He's giving me this performance. I'm sitting here and asking myself, what's this Harvard highbrow think? I'm a bimbo or what? I inserted a tape in my micro cassette player without saying anything. Marino nodded for me to press the play button. Act 1, he drolly announced. The setting, the Peterson kitchen. The main character, Matt. The role, tragic. He's pale and wounded about the eyes, okay? He's starting off at the wall. Me? I'm seeing a movie in my head. Never been to Boston and wouldn't know Harvard from a hole in the ground, but I'm seeing old Brick and Ivy. He fell silent as the tape abruptly began with Peterson mid-sentence. He was talking about Harvard, answering questions about when he and Lori had met. I heard my share of police interviews over the years, and this one was perplexing me. Why did it matter? What did Peterson's courting of Lori back in their college days have to do with her murder? At the same time, I think a part of me knew. Marino was probing, drawing Peterson out. Marino was looking for anything that might show Peterson to be obsessive and warped and possibly capable of overt psychopathy. I got up to shut the door so he wouldn't be interrupted as the recorded voice went quietly on. I'd seen her before on campus, this blonde, carrying an armload of books and oblivious, as if she was in a hurry and had a lot on her mind. Marino: what was it about her that made you notice them, Matt? It's hard to say, but she intrigued me from a distance. I'm not sure why, but part of it may have been that she was usually alone, in a hurry, on her way somewhere. She was confident and seemed to have purpose. She made me curious. Does that happen very often? You know, where you see some attractive woman and she makes you curious from a distance? I'm saying. I don't think so. I mean, I notice people just like everybody else does. But with her, with Lori, it was different. Go on. You met her, finally. Where? It was at a party in the spring, early May. The party was in an off-campus apartment belonging to a buddy of my roommate, a guy who turned out to be Lori's lab partner, which was why she'd come. She walked in around 9, just about the time I was getting ready to leave. Her lab partner, Tim, I think was his name, popped open a beer for her and they started talking. I'd never heard her voice before. Contralto, soothing, very pleasant to listen to, the sort of voice that makes you turn around to find the source of it. She was telling anecdotes about some professor and the people around her were laughing. Lori had a way of getting everybody's attention without trying. In other words, you didn't leave the party after all. You saw her and decided to stick around? Yes. What did she look like back then? Her hair was longer, and she was wearing it up the way ballet dancers do. She was slender, very attractive. You like slender blondes then? You find those qualities attractive in a woman? I just thought she was attractive, that's all. And there was more to it. It was her intelligence. That's what made her stand out. What else? I don't understand. What do you mean? I'm just wondering what attracted you to her. I find it interesting. I can't really answer that. It's mysterious, that element. How can you meet a person and be so aware? It's as if something inside you wakes up. I don't know why. God, I don't know. Another pause, this one longer. She was the kind of lady people notice absolutely all the time whenever we went. Oh, hang on. She was the kind of lady people notice absolutely all the time whenever we went to places together or my friends were around. She upstaged me, really. I didn't mind that. In fact, I liked it. I enjoyed sitting back and watching it happen. I'd analyze it, try to figure out what it was that drew people to her. Charisma is something you have or you don't have. You can't manufacture it. You can't. She didn't try. It just was. You said when you used to see her on campus, she seemed to keep to herself. What about other times? What I'm wondering is if her habit to be friendly with others, you know, if she was at a store or a gas station, did she talk to people she didn't know? Or if someone came by the house, deliveryman, for example, was she the type to invite the person in, be friendly? No, she rarely talked to strangers. And I know she didn't invite strangers into the house. Never. especially when I wasn't there. She lived in Boston. It was acclimated to the dangers of the city. And she worked in the ER, was familiar with violence, the bad things that happen to people. She wouldn't have invited a stranger in or been what I consider particularly vulnerable to that part of thing. In fact, when the murder started happening around here, it frightened her. When I'd come home on the weekend, she hated it. When I'd leave, hated it more than ever, because she didn't like being alone at night. It bothered her more than it used to. Seems like she would have been careful about keeping all the windows locked if she was nervous about because of the murders around here. I told you, she probably thought it was locked. But you accidentally left it, the bathroom window, unlocked last weekend when you was replacing the screen. I'm not sure, but that's the only thing I can figure. Becker's voice. Did she mention anybody coming by the house or an encounter somewhere with someone who made her nervous? Anything at all? Maybe a strange car she noticed in your neighborhood, or the suspicion at some point that maybe she was being followed or observed? Maybe she meets some guy and he put the move on her? Nothing like that. Would she have been likely to tell you if something like that had happened? Definitely. She told me everything. A week, maybe 2 weeks ago, she thought she heard something in the backyard. She called the police. A patrol car came by. It was just a cat messing with the garbage cans. The point is, she told me everything. What other activities was she involved in besides work? She had a few friends. A couple of other women, doctors at the hospital. Sometimes she went out to dinner with them or shopping, maybe a movie. That was about it. She was so busy. In the main, she worked her shift and came home. She'd study, sometimes practice the violin. During the week, she generally worked, came home and slept. The weekends, she kept open for me. That was our time. We were together on the weekends. Last weekend was the last time you saw her? Sunday afternoon, around 3, right before I drove back to Charlottesville. We didn't go out that day. It was raining. Raw. We stayed in, drank coffee, talked. How often did you talk to her during the week? Several times, whenever we could. The last time was last night, Thursday night. I called to tell her I'd be in after play practice, that I might be a few minutes later than usual because of dress rehearsal. She was supposed to be off this weekend. If it was nice, we were thinking of driving to the beach. Silence. Peterson was struggling. I could hear him taking a deep breath, trying to steady himself. When you talked to her last night, does she have anything to report? Any problems? Any mention of anybody coming by the house? Anyone bothering her at work? Maybe weird phone calls? Anything? Silence. Nothing. Nothing like that. She was in good spirits, laughing, looking forward to the weekend. What if a cosmetic is the killer? Tell us a little more about her, Matt. Every little thing you can think of might help. Her background, her personality, what was important to her. Mechanically. She's from Philadelphia. Her dad's an insurance salesman. She has 2 brothers, both younger. Medicine was the most important thing to her. It was her calling. What kind of doctor was she studying to be? A plastic surgeon. Interesting. Why did she decide on that? When she was 10, 11, her mother got breast cancer, underwent 2 radical mastectomies. She survived, but her self-esteem was destroyed. I think she felt deformed, worthless, untouchable. Lori talked about it sometimes. I think she wanted to help people who have been through things like that. And she played the violin? Yes. Did she ever give concerts, playing the symphony, anything public like that? She could have, I think, but she didn't have time. What else? For example, you're big on acting in a play right now. Was she interested in that kind of thing? Very much so. That's one of the things that fascinated me about her when we first met. She left the party where we met, and walked the campus for hours. When I started telling her about some of the courses I was taking, I realized she knew a lot about the theater, and we started talking about plays and such. I was into Ibsen then. We got into that, got into reality and illusion, what's genuine, what's ugly in people and society. One of the strongest themes is the feeling of alienation from home. We talked about that. And she surprised me. I'll never forget it. She laughed and said, "You artists think you're the only ones who can relate to these things. Many of us have the same feelings, the same emptiness, the same loneliness, but we don't have the tools to verbalize them. So we carry on. We struggle. Feelings are feelings. I think people's feelings are pretty much the same all over the world." We got into an argument, a friendly debate. I disagreed. Some people feel things more deeply than others, and some people feel things the rest of us don't. This is what causes isolation, the sense of being apart, different. Is this something you relate to? It is something I understand. I may not feel everything other people feel, but I understand the feelings. Nothing surprises me. If you study literature, drama, you get in touch with a vast spectrum of human emotions, needs and impulses, good and bad. It's my nature to step into other characters, to feel what they feel, to act as they do, but it doesn't mean these manifestations are genuinely my own. I think if anything makes me feel different from others, it's my need to experience these things, my need to analyze and understand the vast spectrum of human emotions I just mentioned. Can't you understand the emotions of the person who did this to your wife? Silence. Almost inaudibly. Good God, no. You sure about that? No. I mean, yes, I'm sure. I don't want to understand it. I know it's a hard thing for you to think about, Matt, but you could help us out a lot if you had any ideas. For example, if you was designing the role for a killer like this, what would he be like? I don't know. The filthy son of a bitch. His voice was breaking, exploding with rage. You're asking me. You're the fucking cops. You're supposed to be the ones figuring it out. Sorry? He abruptly fell silent, as if a needle had been lifted off a record. The tape played a long stretch in which nothing was heard except Marino clearing his throat and a chair scraping back. Then Marino asked Becker, "You wouldn't by any chance have an extra tape in your car?" It was Peterson who mumbled, and I think he was crying. "I got a couple of them back in the bedroom." "Well now," Marino's voice coolly drawled, "that's mighty nice of you, Matt." 20 minutes later, Matt Peterson got to the subject of finding his wife's body. It was awful to hear and not see. There were no distractions. I drifted on the current of his images and recollections. His words were taking me into dark areas where I did not want to go. The tape played on. I'm sure of it. I didn't recall first. I never did, just left. Didn't hang around or anything, as I was saying. I left Charlottesville as soon as the rehearsal was over and the props and costumes were put away. I guess this was close to 12:30. I was in a hurry to get home. I hadn't seen Lori all week. It was close to 2 when I parked in front of the house, and my first reaction was to notice the lights out and realize she'd already gone to bed. Her schedule was very demanding. On 12 hours and off 24, the shift out of sync with human biological clocks and never the same. She worked Friday until midnight, was to be off Saturday, today, and tomorrow she would be on from midnight to noon Monday, off Tuesday, and on Wednesday from noon to midnight again. That's how it went. I unlocked the front door and flipped the living room light. Everything looked normal. Retrospectively, I can say that even though I had no reason to be looking for anything out of the ordinary, I do remember the hall light was off. I noticed because usually she left it on for me. It was my routine to go straight to the bedroom. If she wasn't too exhausted, and she was almost never was, we would sit up in bed and drink wine and talk, stay up, and then sleep very late. I was confused. Something was confusing to me. The bedroom. I couldn't see anything much at first because the lights, of course, were out. But something felt wrong immediately. I sensed it before I saw it, like an animal senses things. And I thought I was smelling something, but I wasn't sure, and it only added to my confusion. What sort of smell? Silence. I'm trying to remember. I was only vaguely aware of it, but aware enough to be puzzled. It was an unpleasant smell, sort of sweet, but putrid. Weird. You mean a body odor type smell? Similar, but not exactly. It was Swedish. Unpleasant, rather pungent and sweaty. Something you've smelled before. A pause. No, it wasn't quite like anything I've ever smelled before, I don't think. It was faint, but maybe I was more aware of it because I couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything the instant I walked into the bedroom. It was so quiet inside. The first thing that struck my senses was this peculiar odor, and it flickered in my mind. Oddly, it flickered in my mind. Maybe Lori had been eating something in bed. I don't know. It was like waffles, or maybe syrupy, pancakes. I thought she was sick and had been eating junk and gotten sick. Sometimes she went on binges, ate fattening things when she was stressed or anxious. She gained a lot of weight after I started commuting to Charlottesville. His voice was trembling very badly now. The smell was sick, unhealthy, as if maybe she was sick and been in bed all day, explaining why the lights were out and why it hadn't been up for me. Silence. Then what happened, Matt? Then my eyes began to adjust, and I didn't understand what I was seeing. The bed materialized in the dimness. I didn't understand the covers, the way they were hanging off, and her lying on top in a strange position, and not having anything on. God, my heart was coming out of my chest before it even registered, and I flipped on the light, and I saw her. I was screaming, but I couldn't hear my own voice. Like I was screaming inside my head, like my brain was floating out of my skull. I saw the stain on the sheet, the red, the blood coming out of her nose and mouth, her face. I didn't think it was her. It wasn't her. It didn't even look like her. It was somebody else, a prank, a terrible trick. It wasn't her. What did you do next, Matt? Did you touch her or disturb anything inside the bedroom? A long pause and the sound of Peterson's shallow, rapid breathing. No, I mean, yes, I touched her. I didn't think. I just touched her. Her shoulder, her arm, I don't remember. She was warm. But when I started to feel for a pulse, I couldn't find her wrists because she was on top of them. They were behind her back, tied. And I started to touch her neck and saw the cord embedded in her skin. I think I tried to feel her heart beating or hear it, but I don't remember. I knew it. I knew she was dead. The way she looked. She had to be dead. I ran into the kitchen. I don't remember what I said or even remember dialing the phone. But I know I called the police and I paced in and out of the room. I leaned against the wall and cried and talked to her. I talked to her until the police got here. I told her not to let it be real. I kept going over to her and backing off and begging her not to let it be real. I kept listening for someone to get here. It seemed to take forever. The electrical cords, the way she was tied. Did you disturb anything? Touch the cords? Do anything else? Can you remember? No. I mean, I don't remember if I did. But I don't think I did. Something stopped me. I wanted to cover her, but something stopped me. Something told me not to touch anything. Do you own a knife? Silence. A knife, Matt. We found a knife, a survival knife, with a whetstone in the sheath and a compass in the handle. Oh? Uh-huh. I got it several years ago. One of those mail-order knives you could get for $5.95 or something. I used to take it with me when I went hiking. It's got fishing line matches inside the handle. Where'd you see it last? On the desk. It's been on the desk. I think Lori was using it as a letter opener. I don't know. It's just been sitting there for months. Maybe it made her feel better to have it out, being alone at night and all. I told her we could get a dog, but she was allergic. If I hear what you were saying, Matt, you're telling me the knife was on the desk last time you saw it? That would have been when? Last Saturday, Sunday, when you was home, the weekend you replaced the screen in the bathroom window? No response. You know any reason your wife might have had to move the knife? Maybe tucked it in a drawer or something? She ever done that in the past? I don't think so. It's been on the desk near the lamp for months. Can you explain why we found this knife in the bottom dresser drawer underneath some sweaters and beside a box of condoms? Your dresser drawer, I'm guessing. Silence. No, I can't explain it. That's where you found it? Yes. The condoms, they've been in there a long time. A hollow laugh that was almost a gasp. From before Lori went on the pill. You sure about that? About the condoms? Of course I'm sure. She went on the pill about 3 months after we got married. We got married just before we moved here, less than 2 years ago. Now, Matt, I've got to ask you several questions of a personal nature. I want you to understand I'm not picking on you or trying to embarrass you, but I have reasons. There's things we got to know for your own good, too, okay? Silence. I could hear Marino lighting a cigarette. All right, then, the condoms. Did you have any relations outside your marriage? With anybody else, I'm saying? Absolutely not. You was living out of town during the week. Now me, I would have been tempted. Well, I'm not you. Lori was everything to me, and I have nothing with anybody else. No one in the play with you, maybe? No. See, the point is, we do these little things. I mean, they're human nature, okay? A good-looking guy like you, hey, the women probably throw themselves at you. But if you were seeing someone, we need to know. There could possibly be a connection. Almost inaudibly. No, I've told you no. There can be no connection unless you're accusing me of something. No one's accusing you of anything, Matt. There was a sound of something sliding across the table. The ashtray, perhaps. And Marina was asking, when was the last time you had sex with your wife? Silence. Peterson's voice was shaking. Jesus Christ. I know it's your business, personal. But you need to tell us. We got our reasons. Sunday morning, last Sunday. You know there'll be tests run, Matt. Scientists will be examining everything so we can get blood types, make other comparisons. We need samples from you just like we needed your prints. So we can sort things out and know what's yours and what's hers and maybe he's from. The tape abruptly ended. I blinked and my eyes focused for what seemed the first time in hours. Marino reached for the recorder, turned it off, and retrieved his tapes. He concluded. After that, we took him down to Richmond General and got the suspect kit. Betty's examining his blood, even as we speak, to see how it compares. I nodded. Glancing back at the wall, it was noon. I felt sick. Something, huh? Marino stifled a yawn. You see it, don't you? I'm telling you, the guy's off. I mean, there's something off about any guy who can sit there after finding his wife like that and talk the way he does. Most of them, they don't talk much. He would have rattled on till Christmas if I'd let him. A lot of pretty words and poetry, you ask me. He's slick. You want my opinion, that's it. He's so slick, it gives me the willies. I slipped off my glasses and kneaded my temples. My brain was heated up, the muscles in my neck on fire. The silk blouse beneath my lab coat was damp. The circuits were so overloaded that what I wanted to do was place my head on my arms and sleep. His world is words, Marino, I heard myself saying. An artist would have painted the picture for you. Matt painted it with words. This is how he exists, how he expresses himself, through words and more words. To think a thought is to express it verbally for people like him. I put my glasses back on and looked at Marino. He was perplexed, his meaty, shop-worn face flushed. Well, take that bit about the knife, Doc. It's got his prints on it, even though he says his wife's the one who's been using it for months. It's got that sparkle crap on the handle, just like he had on his hands. And the knife was in his dresser drawer, like maybe someone was hiding it. Now that gives you a pause, don't you think? I think it's possible the knife was on top of Laurie's desk, just as it had been, that she rarely used it and had no reason to touch the blade. When she did, if she simply opened letters with it occasionally. I was seeing this in my head, so vividly I almost believed the images were memories of an event that had actually occurred. I think it's possible the killer saw the knife too. Perhaps he took it out of the sheath to look at it. Perhaps he used it. Why? Why not? I asked. A shrug. To jerk everyone around, perhaps? Perversity, if nothing else. We have no idea what went on, for God's sake. He may have asked her about the knife, tormented her with her own or her husband's own weapon. And if she talked with him, as I suspect she did, then he may have learned the knife belongs to her husband. He thinks I'll use it. I'll put it in a drawer where the cops are sure to find it. Or maybe he doesn't think much about it at all. Maybe his reason was utilitarian. In other words, it was a bigger knife than the one he brought with him. Not as I appealed to him, he used it. Didn't want to take it with him. Stuck it in a drawer, hoping we wouldn't know he used it, and was out. And it was that simple. Or maybe Matt did it all. Marino flatly said. Matt? Think about it. Could a husband rape and bind his wife? Could he fracture her ribs and break her fingers? Could he slowly strangle her to death? This is someone he loves or once loved. Someone he sleeps with, eats with, talks to, lives with. A person, Sergeant. Not a stranger or a depersonalized object of lust and violence. How are you going to connect a husband murdering his wife with the first 3 stranglings? Clearly, he'd already thought about this. They occurred after midnight, early on Saturday mornings, right after about the time Matt was getting home from Charlottesville. Maybe his wife got suspicious about him for some reason, and he decides he's got to whack her. Maybe he does it like the others to make us think the serial killer did it. Or maybe the wife's who he was after all along, and he does this other 3 first to make it look like his wife was done by this anonymous insane killer. A wonderful plot for Agatha Christie. I was pushing back my chair and getting up, but as you know, in real life, murder is usually depressingly simple. I think these murders are simple. I think they're actually what they appear to be, impersonal, random murders committed by someone who stalks his victims long enough to figure out when to strike. Hey, Futter. Marino got up too. Yeah, well, in real life, Dr. Scapetta, bodies don't have freaky little sparkles all over them that match the same freaky sparkles on the hands of the husband who discovers the body and leaves his prints all over the damn place. And the victims don't have pretty boy actors for husbands, squirrels writing dissertations on sex and violence, and cannibals and faggots. I calmly I asked him, the odor Peterson mentioned, did you smell anything like that when you arrived on the scene? No, didn't smell a damn thing. So maybe he was smelling seminal fluid? If he's telling the truth. I should think he would know what that smells like. But he wouldn't be expecting to smell it. No reason it should come to mind at first. Now me, when I went into the bedroom, I didn't smell nothing like he was describing. Do you recall smelling anything peculiar at the other strangling scenes? No, ma'am. Raised my suspicion that either Matt imagined it or was making it up to throw us off track. Then it came to me. In the 3 previous cases, the women weren't found until the next day, after they'd been dead at least 12 hours. Marino paused in the doorway, his face incredulous. You suggesting Matt got home just after the killer left? That the killer's got some weird case of BO? I'm suggesting it's possible. His face tightened with anger. As he stalked down the hall, I heard him mutter, "Goddamn women!" And that's chapter 4. We're getting a little more about how Marino thinks and what he thinks of Scarpetta. And, you know, how he tends to process things in his mind being a police officer. Would anybody like to pop on to give their 2 cents? Marino is, the first thing that strikes me about Marino is that he's very, very gruff. He's jaded. He's one of these police officers that has seen too much.
Yeah, way.
Way too much. Do we have any water over there?
No. Homicide be way too many brutal things going on in the world, and it doesn't really, it just sticks in his craw.
Yeah.
So to speak.
It's made him kind of numb to it in some aspects, which I would guess tend to happen if you deal with this a while. She's secretly Jessica Fletcher. I was Ronan the night of the murder. I bet he was with me. So in seeing this take shape, and I hope I did a pretty good job of distinguishing voices, because sometimes when you have 2 or 3 people talking, it's kind of hard to do different inflections. But I hope I did the reading justice. I know Posmatic said she was cooking something, so that's why
the
she's
problem.
muted.
She's cooking.
Yeah, good thing we can't smell it. Thank you, Batman. Thank you.
I'm gonna have to get you a HAL 9000 voice changer and everything, just so you can get Batman the oh, I'm sorry, Bruce, I can't do that right now.
He cooking the books.
Shit, tell her to cook my books and everything. Make it seem like I got money.
I know, right? Man, we could use a couple extra bucks here and there. So anyway, sorry I had to do with clothes. Oh, that's all right. It is a stream, so you can go back and listen to it later. For those of you that haven't heard me read before, I do try and do different voices for the different characters. So it sounds more like a script when there's a lot of dialogue and less like a book, which I believe Beardbarian mentioned earlier.
Beardbarian says you should be, I think Batman has too on occasion mentioned that you should be doing audiobooks.
Yeah. Thank you, Eric. Thank you. For the dad jokes, you can meet me in Discord. Since we only have a few minutes left, I do have a couple of things to suggest to fill the rest of your Saturday out. The Beardbarian, who joined us in the chat, has a storytelling stream that starts at 3 p.m. Eastern. Schmeckel has his Cuntstream at 11 p.m. tonight, Eastern Time. And Sunday FUNDAY, as always, is going to be on Red Robot's channel, and it starts at noon Eastern Time. All of those links are in the description. Please meet me, same time, noon Eastern, next Saturday, as I read Chapter 5 and possibly Chapter 6, depending on time and the conversation. And as always, my friends, keep your mind open and inspiration will follow. You guys have a wonderful Saturday.